So we're going to talk about, I guess, Nash equilibria. We're going to try to work 4 of the problems. I'm going to argue that the other problems are the same. Hopefully that will be intuitive. Okay, so first, just with like Nash equilibria, I think there's a bit of confusion about what that is. So I've been trying to hammer that Nash equilibria is this sort of concept of behavior, right? So we have multiple people interacting, right? And we sort of want to know, what are they going to do, right? So we have all of these scenarios that we've written out on the sheet, and we want to know what these people are going to do. And we want to know what they're going to do given certain conditions and certain types of interactions. So there's a couple big things, right? So one of the things that we're going to do in future classes is we're going to talk about history. So you can sort of think of this idea of like, you might interact with your mom multiple times in your life, hopefully more than once. And you might interact with a stranger multiple times, or just somebody in your class, right? So the first thing that we're going to assume is that there's no sort of future and no past. Now the past shouldn't matter, but we're just going to put this on here. So the first thing is, for Nash equilibria, we're just going to assume that there's no future and no past. Okay? So you shouldn't be thinking like, will this guy be mad at me if I do this thing, right? Because what we're assuming for Nash equilibrium is that you arrive to these sort of this sort of situation, to these outcomes, right? You do things basically because of the incentives in front of you, and the numbers that we put into these games are going to represent incentives, right? And they should be perfectly representative. So I've talked a bit about how you don't really care about the other person. This is maybe not precisely true, but the point is that you don't care about the person except for the numbers that we've shown in the game. Right, so it's not that you hate the other person, but for some of the examples, I'm going to assume that you don't care about them at all. That you don't even care about them in the sense that you, right, the actual person that's watching this video, would care about another random stranger, right? So I mean, people care about random strangers, right? It's, it's life. It's how people feel. For some of these, like the number 3, the money question, I'm just assuming you don't care about them at all. In reality, people feel differently, so they'll probably arrive at like different scenarios, but it's that you're playing a different game because the numbers I've put down for number 3 are different than your actual preferences, right? So suffice it to say, the numbers should be perfectly representative, so they should tell the whole story about how people feel. And if you feel differently about the situation, that does not mean that the game is arriving at the wrong sort of outcome. It just means that you wouldn't arrive at that outcome because your numbers in the game, if you were to play it, would be different, right? So what sort of like situations does Nash equilibria really apply to, right? That's, I think, an important thing to think through so that you maybe have better intuition for what we're actually doing, right? So we've been throwing around this topic of rationality for people, right? Agents, and we're going to assume that they're rational, right? And what this probably means, like the type of people that we're going to be thinking about are sort of like people that play the game a lot. Rational means that people play a lot, they get really good at the game, and one of the sort of concepts of who might be acting out sort of a Nash equilibrium, this solution. Let's say you sort of walk to work every day, or drive, I guess, probably driving is important. You do it a lot. You experience sort of this decision of which side of the road to be on, right? And you do really well at this game, right? You always stay on the right and everybody else stays on the right, and you avoid a collision. And you do really good at this game because you acted out a lot, and you sort of, I mean, you probably don't experiment much, but you sort of see that this is like the sort of thing to be doing. So they play a lot, and also another important thing in real life is that the game is important. So it doesn't just suffice that this person is sort of playing the game a lot, but they also need to be, like, it needs to matter a lot to them, right? So a lot of people will do very stupid things. And in fact, if you like run experiments and you get people to come into the lab, they'll do really stupid things because the game doesn't matter that much to them, right? But part of the point of economics is that like people take things really seriously and they become rational because sort of what they're doing is important, right? So when you're in the market, it's really important that you pay attention to your prices, to all of these things, because it could be the difference between you going out of business, right, and losing your job, basically. So one of the big things is that the game is important, and we assume that people will come to Nash equilibria and they will be locked into it in a sense if all of the people that they interact with, all of these people that they interact with, they need to be different, right? Because you can't have a history with these people. So you're kind of like randomly interacting with a bunch of people over and over, and you learn sort of what to do. And we're just going to assume for now that all of society chooses the same Nash equilibria. So I interact with somebody and we both walk on the right side of the road, right? So we sort of avoid colliding. We don't have to do this weird little dance where we sort of try to figure out who's going to go right, who's going to go left, because we know to be on the right side of the sidewalk, right? Because you've sort of played this game enough and you're sort of locked into this equilibrium. And some of these games are not quite that, which is maybe something to pay attention to, I guess. Okay, so just to really define what a Nash equilibrium is and what we're doing, so we're going to have a payoff matrix, right? I've been drawing these a lot. You've seen these in your exercises from today. So I'm just going to draw out the first one, sort of explain it, hopefully, so that nobody's lost. Hopefully doing it again will help. Okay, so you have this box. The box is going to have different options on it. It's going to have different players. Okay, so what's usually going to happen is we're going to have player one, right? And player one is going to be usually the row player, and player two will tend to be the column player, right? So player one is going to make decisions between the rows, right? So player one can choose here Hare or Stag. Most of the games in the problem said both players have the same decisions, but that's not always the case. Yeah, there's only one question in the problem set where people have different decisions, but in real life it tends to be that people have different decisions. Okay, so we have player one, they make a choice between Hare and Stag, right? So player one will always be on the row, they'll always be making decisions between the rows. Player two is going to be the column, and they're going to make decisions between the columns, right? So they can play Hare or they can play Stag. And now to the numbers, right? So these numbers are going to be utility. That might be really easy for some people, and they maybe have seen that before, but what utility means is that you assign a number to how much somebody likes something, right? So I might really like the experience of eating chocolate ice cream, right? So I might assign like a 7 to that. So that's my utility for eating ice cream, right? And I might really hate doing the dishes, right? So dishes would maybe be a 2, right? And then maybe I really don't like breaking my leg, like that's really a bad time, and maybe that would be a -5, right? So utility should be a ranking of all of the things that could ever happen to you, or that you could do, right? Like utility is sort of, it's this number that tells us how happy you are. On to the payoffs. So the first number is always going to be player 1. It's going to be the row player, right? And the second number will always be player 2. It will be the column player, right? We've seen, and we will see later, the utility is written out like this. So this would be essentially another way to write it. So you're doing the same thing, you just don't have a comma, but you've put the row players right here and the column players right here, right? Player 1 is here, player 2 is here. Anyways, so we have our utilities, and now we need to figure out how are we going to get a Nash equilibria, right? So really the concept of a Nash equilibria is that given that I'm playing with like a random guy, you know, some like just person, right? I know that they've been playing this same game as well, right? And we're going to play it once. We're not going to see each other afterwards. And whatever numbers in here tell me the truth about his sort of preferences, right? So the idea is I meet somebody in the street and we're going to do this. If we're actually doing it like over and over, we need a different model. If we care about each other, we need to change these numbers, right? This game needs to look different to actually represent that. But for now, we're just going to focus on this very simple game. So we want a Nash equilibria, right? And what a Nash equilibria tells us is that when I play this game with this random guy on the street, if we've played it a lot and we're sort of in the same population, where we're playing it with a bunch of different people, it predicts that we might do this thing, right? So it says we might choose this. And what we're going to do is we're going to say, hey, given that like everybody else in society, when given the chance, will play Hare, right? Let's just assume. Given that everybody else in society will play Hare, what do I want to do, right? So if I know that everybody else is going to play Hare, as player 1, I have an option between playing Hare and Stag. I always have this option. This is always going to be the question, right? I can get a payoff of 1 or a payoff of 0, right? And I've sort of ranked them, right? So I'm saying, okay, 1's bigger than 0, so I like doing Hare when this guy does Hare too, right? So I know that this is my best response to Hare. So if I know that just everybody in society is doing this Hare thing, they're going looking for Hares, I should also look for Hares. So I'm going to underline it. People did underlines. They also did, I was trying to get stars to happen, but I think underlining makes sense. So we underline this because it's the best response, right? And then the same thing needs to happen for the other player. So I'm going to ask for the first player, what do they want to do? And for the second player, what do they want to do? And if both players sort of want to stay here, right? This is an equilibrium, so staying would be sort of equilibrating, right? If both players want to stay here, if it's both their best response, then we'll have a Nash equilibrium, right? And what this looks like is that we're going to sort of argue that, like, if we had this situation in the real world, where you're doing this thing over and over just to random people, and there's like no future, no past with this person, right? If you're interacting with people like this, then this would be a possible outcome, right? And hopefully it's telling us, real things about the world, real things about situations, and I'll try to argue why this does that. Okay, so this is the concept of Nash equilibria. So let me just finish checking if Hare is a Nash equilibria. And ideally you should do this for all of the sort of, all of the boxes. And then once you've checked all the boxes, you can tell whether or not there's a Nash equilibrium right there, right? Eventually, if you do this enough, you'll get a sense for where Nash equilibrium might be. You'll be able to expedite the process with a couple things. I'll show you a trick today But yeah, okay, so just to get on with it, so we know that this is player one's best response to player two playing Hare, right? So I'm going to write this out with math notation to hopefully keep it on the board. But okay, so the best response of player one to player two playing Hare, and this is a function if anybody's excited for that. The best response of player one to player two playing Hare is Hare, right? And this just means that they do the best by choosing Hare here. Oh, sorry, yeah. Given that the other player chooses Hare, they do best by choosing Hare. Okay, so now what is the best response of player two to player one choosing Hare, right? So what's the best response of player two to player one choosing Hare? Well, let's check, right? So we have a payoff of 0 if they choose Stag, right? 0, and we have a payoff of 2 if they choose Hare. So they're going to choose Hare, right? It's a higher number. So this should also be Hare. Hopefully that's legible and not insane. Okay, so we have this. And when this happens, we know that there's a Nash equilibria there. So what we're kind of saying is that, like, this is called a coordination game. So there's 4 types of games that are in your problem set. There's 8 questions. We repeat some of them. I'm going to just say, hey, this game is the same game. It'll have the same equilibria for the same reason. Hopefully it's not too confusing. But this is called a coordination game. So as the name says, basically the 2 equilibria are going to be the players coordinating on some action. So here the story is these hunters, they see a stag roaming around the land, and they sort of, usually they just hunt hares, right? And they eat them and they're fine, and they live, right? It's not maybe the best existence, but it's a real existence. So they tend to just get hares. But they see the stag, and the question is sort of like, if me and this other guy sort of both go for the stag, then what will happen is that we will get it, right? And we'll be happy, and we'll eat well that night, right? And for a few months later. But if I go looking for the stag, and he's out there farming hares, right? Not farming, hunting hares, then I'll just be like, I just won't get the stag. Like, it'll just be too big, right? And I just won't be able to catch it. We won't be able to sort of coordinate, right? So we need to coordinate to catch this stag. And so the game really is like, is the other guy going to come with me and make this thing happen, right? And what our story is going to tell us is that the 2 Nash equilibria are when people coordinate. That's the name of this game. It's called a coordination game. It's going to be like that. But okay, so back to sort of the Nash equilibria, right? So whenever we have this structure where the best response of player one to something, I'm going to call this X, I'm going to call this Y. So when the best response of player one to X is Y, and when the best response of Y, of player two to Y is X, right? So you sort of see this reciprocal nature. Then you know that it's a Nash equilibria. So sort of it's like, so my best response to them choosing Hare is also Hare, right? So given that they're choosing Hare, I would also like to do it. And they have the same thing going on, right? Given that I'm choosing Hare, they would also like to choose it. And because these 2 things should serve to keep us in both choosing Hare, right? There's no reason for us to sort of leave this universe where we're just hunting by ourselves, right? And we can't kind of like break out ourselves. We both have to get together to break out. So this rules out communication, this rules out like goodwill, this rules out sort of seeing each other every day and having other interests that we might sort of have to care about, right? So you can think about your friends, right? There might be things like this where you're trying to coordinate, right, and get to a better sort of situation. And the way that you do that is by talking to them, right? and sort of having common interest. I mean, that's just how it is. So we have to rule that out for this to be an equilibrium. But this is part of what we're talking about. These are sort of strangers. Okay, so Hare is an equilibrium. I'm going to argue that Stag is as well. So we do the same procedure. I'm going to underline to say something's a best response to, the strategy in its column or its row. So given that player 2 plays Stag, what do I have the option between playing Hare and playing Stag, right? So I can get a payoff of 1 or a payoff of 6. I want the payoff of 6, so I will play Stag if player 2 plays Stag. Right, so player 1 should play Stag if player 2 plays Stag, right? And is the same thing going on for player 1? Sorry, is the same thing going on for player 2? Given that player 1 plays Stag, player 2 can get a payoff of 8 or they can get a payoff of 2, right? So they'd prefer to get the payoff of 8, and they do that by playing Stag. So again, Stag is the best response to Stag, and Stag is the best response to Stag, so this is an equilibrium, this is an equilibrium. I'm going to show you why the other ones are not equilibria, right? And to be clear, you should be doing this procedure, right? For every cell, check what would player 1 want to do given that player 2 chooses, Hare or Stag, whatever cell you're in, right? And then ask, what would player 2 like to do given that player 1 is choosing Hare, right? Whatever strategy is keeping you in this box, right? You do that if both of them would like to stay, if they're willing to stay doing this thing, it'll be a Nash equilibrium. Okay. So let's just look at Hare Stag. Yeah, given that player 1 is choosing Hare, right? So we're in this box. So given that player 1 is choosing Hare, would player 2 like to continue to choose Stag? Well, they can get a payoff of 0, they can get a payoff of 2. So they'd like to take the payoff of 2. So this is not a Nash equilibria, right? So because there's a reason to not stay here, right? A reason to deviate for player 2, this can't be a Nash equilibrium. Same thing happens with Stag Hare. So player 1 chooses Stag, player 2 chooses Hare. Same thing happens, right? So if we look, is player 1 willing to continue to play Stag given that player 2 is playing Hare? Well, they get a payoff of 0 or they get a payoff of 1. Yeah, so that they want to go to Hare, right? They don't want to keep doing the thing they're doing. So also not an equilibrium. Okay, so this is a coordination game. This is a game where the players would like to sort of coordinate on the same strategy. And this is similar to the problem 8. This is basically this, like exactly the same. So you have a good friend that you'd like to see, and you both choose which cafeteria to go to, right? You can go to Southside or you can go to Ike's. If you both go to Southside, you get a payoff of 1, right? Or you both get a payoff of 1. If you guys don't go to the same place, you get a payoff of 0. And if you both go to Ike's, you get a payoff of 54, and your friend gets a payoff of 16, right? So Ike's is the superior dining hall. And the two equilibria are going to be Southside, and Ike's. And the reason is exactly the same here, right? Essentially, you can always improve your payoff by matching your opponent's sort of move, right? And that's the same here, right? I mean, by matching up with Hare, I always improve my payoff. At least one of the players can always improve their payoff. So yeah, 1 and 8 are roughly the same. They're going to be called a coordination game. The second game that we have is this game of chicken. And I don't know, I love chicken. It's a fun game. It's very bro-y though. It's about sort of winning. That's really all it's about, being willing to tolerate more pain, right? Which is, it's a game. And here the Nash equilibria sort of setting that probably makes sense is imagining that this person, you know them, and you interact with them a lot. So we're throwing out this first Nash equilibria. So there are multiple ways to think about Nash equilibria. this is going to be the second way that we might think about it. We're going to say that you interact with this person constantly, but you don't sort of develop any maybe friendship with them or anything that would like sort of change how you feel about them, change how you feel about this game, right? I don't think that it's an awful approximation to believe that this is how you might play chicken with a friend. I think these payoffs are probably representative. I think when you play chicken with a friend, it really is about winning, and it really is about this sort of thing where you're... I think the payoffs kind of look like this. Okay, so I'm going to draw it out. I'm going to make this happen. But yeah, so you're making a decision, right? You're riding at breakneck pace towards the other person. I guess in my example, you're driving a car. I always played it on a bike because I was a child when I was doing this. If you both swerve, right, you tie. So you get a payoff of 0. If you go straight while they swerve, you win the game, right? You get your payoff of +1, they get their payoff of -1. The flipped thing happens, right, when you swerve and they go straight, right? Because you've swerved, you got out of the way, so you lose the game of chicken, and they went straight, so they win. So you get a -1 because you lost, they get a +1 because they won. And then if you both go straight, you crash and die. So you get a payoff of -100. Hopefully that feels correct. But yeah, let's assume that you sort of... I mean, maybe -100 is even like... Because if you care about your friend a lot, it would be really sad if both of you died. So that's maybe why it's a -100 as well. And you're turning off your sort of friendship for the competition. But if you died after the competition, you'd feel really bad. Well, I guess if you died. So what are we going to do, right? So we want to, again, find Nash equilibrium. So I'm going to start with this guy, see if it's a Nash equilibrium. And yeah, let's just do the procedure, right? So we're going to underline numbers where essentially they beat out the other things in that column, let's say. So if I'm you, the you player, so you choose what to do, right? Or you want to see what your incentives are, and then you want to see what your friend's incentives are, right? So are you willing to stay here, and is your friend willing to stay here, right? So if you both know that this is... Yeah, if you both know that this is the outcome. And really what this game, what you doing this over and over and over, right, so is going to represent is really like one player always winning, right? So there's no like role for randomness, there's no role for reversals here. We're just going to assume that one guy kind of knows that he's going to swerve and one guy kind of knows he's going to go straight, but we'll get to that. Okay, so swerve, right? So if I know, right, this is me, if I know that my friend is going to swerve, what should I do, right? So we just want to look at our payoffs, which is very simple. Well, I can get a payoff of 0, or I can get a payoff of +1, right? So this is not a best response, right? So I already know I'm not going to underline this. So I'm just out of this row. I know it's never going to happen. It's never going to be a Nash equilibrium, right? So as soon as you find that one of these numbers doesn't work, just go to the next one, right? Okay, so I'm going to go to swerve straight. Okay. Well, if I know that my friend is going to go straight, what should I do? Well, I have two payoffs I can get, right? I'm making a choice between these two, basically. Right? So I get -1 or -100. I should take -1 because it's smaller. Sure. So I'm going to underline that. -1 is good for me. And now my friend, what would they like to do if I'm going to swerve, right? So I'm choosing this guy and that guy. So if they know that I'm going to swerve, they have a choice between +1 and 0. So they're going to go straight, right? So because we're both sort of willing to be locked into this game, this is going to be a Nash equilibrium. A similar thing happens here. So the game is symmetric, so it's across this line, it's basically symmetric. So we know that here, given that my friend swerves, I would like to go straight, right? And given that I go straight, my friend would like to swerve. So again, this will be a Nash equilibria. And then we have to check this still. Because it is symmetric, this might also be a Nash equilibria. Okay, if I know that the other guy's going to go straight, what should I do? I have a choice of negative 100 or negative 1. So I don't want to die, so I'm cross it out, and that's not a Nash equilibrium. Okay. So hopefully this should sort of paint a picture, right? So the two Nash equilibria are me winning, basically, right? I go straight, they swerve. And the other is them winning, right? I swerve and they go straight. So kind of the concept here for the Nash equilibria would be that you and your friend played this game a lot, right? And you sort of get into competition mode when you do it, right? And essentially you're going to get into this sort of calcified thing where one of you is winning and the other is never winning. And that's the Nash equilibrium prediction for this. That's odd. I mean, in reality, people probably, there's more going on in this game, but I think it's not an awful sort of description. Okay. In this game, I don't think it's like any of the others. Yeah, it's basically the same. It's the only one that's like this. Okay. Third game is weird, and it takes some precision. But you're sort of, you might imagine this is a weird scenario, but this other player, I mean, the reason I put this scenario down is because economists do lab experiments like this. And the prediction that the lab experiments has is that essentially one of these things will happen. In reality, people actually like each other, so they don't make it happen, which is super valid. It's a reason maybe to not love this example, but I think part of the point of all of this is to really turn off your brain from seeing the game that you would like to be played, or the game that maybe the example sort of set up a bit. Okay, so we have this really weird scenario, and this is basically what happens with these lab experiments. So real economists run these lab experiments, and the game is they give somebody money, right? And they say, hey, do you want to split it with this other guy, or do you want to keep it all for yourself, right? And sometimes, this is not exactly what happens, but sometimes they'll ask the other person, do you want to burn it or do you not want to burn it? And they make the decision at the same time. They sort of don't get to see what the other guy did before they make their decision, right? They make it at the same time. And they might play it a lot, right? So they play it, but they wouldn't play it with the same guy. It would be some random person that they hadn't played it with before. Keep playing it. It's, but not with the same person, because history matters, which we'll see in a couple classes. Okay, so this is a 0 and a 6. And so I'm going to argue for the two equilibria that everybody hated in class. So mechanical way you can do this, right? You can sort of just look at the columns and rows and block things off and see what the biggest numbers are, right? So you can cover here, right? So you can cover here, and you can say which number is bigger, right? So here you would underline both numbers because they're the same size. You do it here, right? You say which number is bigger. You underline this guy because it's bigger than 5, right? And then this takes a bit of imagination, but you would like to do this and look at this row, right? And you say 5's bigger. And you would like to do it again, and again you see that both numbers are the same size, right? So you'd underline both of them. And every place that has 2 underlines would be a Nash equilibria, and every place that has 1 or no underlines is not a Nash equilibria. So our simple procedure has told us. So what you do is you cover here, right? You cover here, so you just want to look at the whole row and basically pick out the biggest. And then you cover here, so you just look at essentially the decision that they are making, right? and you're saying essentially 5 is bigger, so they're going to be choosing that. If this doesn't help you, don't use it. It's so our simple procedure that a student showed me, and I love it now, is do this covering thing, right? So we get keep, burn, and keep, don't burn, right? So these are the two Nash equilibrium predictions. And this is, I think, concerning. I mean, I get why it's concerning, right? Part of the thing is that we've actually chosen two of the worst equilibria, right? This one's really unfair, and this one is really inefficient, right? So nobody gets any money here, and one guy gets all the money here, right? I think to some extent we need to think about the bargaining power that the other player actually has, right? And I think one reason that this equilibrium feels unnatural is because we feel that the other person has bargaining power, right? We feel that they can sort of sway the other person by threatening them. But there is no threat in this game because you have to choose the action at the same time as the other player. We'll see threats later. Threats are cool. I love them. It's really cool how we deal with them, but there are no threats. You're not actually bargaining. You're just doing this thing, right? And what we want to ask is like, what would like the perfectly rational lab subjects do? The ones that play it like 30 times, right? And I mean, you're paid money depending upon how well you do, right? So this is, you're actually giving them $10, you're asking them to split it, you're asking the other person to burn it. We ask how well will these, or what will these lab subjects do? And our prediction, which is not always borne out in data, which is, Nash equilibrium is a model, it's not perfect. It doesn't always tell the truth, is that you will always keep the money, right? And the two things that could happen is that they burn the money or they don't burn the money, right? And that is what we predict might happen. This is not a natural game. I think part of the point of giving you an unnatural game to solve is to really check if you know how to solve these things. And I'm going to show you a trick. So some games you will get this trick basically, and it'll save you a lot of grief. Okay, so there's an intruder in your house. They're bloodthirsty and they would like to attack you. So you sort of meet them in the hallway, right? And you have about half a second to figure out what you're gonna do, right? So you have to, I mean, it's urgent. You don't really have the option to hide. I mean, that's kind of the point, right? This instant, this moment of hesitation, of peace, is enough to get you hurt. Okay, so I'm going to write out the numbers. And here I have actually given numbers that tell a good story. And hopefully that will make everybody happy. Okay. So I'm going to draw your attention. I've drawn this weirdly, right? So I drew the intruder here, you here. You can do that, it's not standard. I did it for a reason, and that reason is that we want to really pay attention to the intruder's payoff because it's going to sort of illustrate to us this thing called dominance. So a player has a dominant strategy. If that strategy, so strategies are choices you can make, right? So a player has a dominant strategy if that strategy always yields a higher payoff, a higher utility, right? If they would always prefer to do that, regardless of the other person's actions. So it's sort of, you look at the game, and you look at your opponent's decisions, and you're like, it doesn't really matter what they do. I just want to do this one thing. And this is a really popular motif in games, partially because it makes it really easy to solve the game. Okay, so if you have a dominant strategy, you know one thing, right? You know that you're always going to pick that strategy. So let's look at the intruder and see if they have a dominant strategy. Okay, so what are their choices, right? They have peace and violence. So I'm going to argue that violence is a dominant strategy. So what we have to do is kind of similar, right? We are just going to focus on the intruder for now. We're going to ask, given that you choose peace, would the intruder like to choose violence? And yeah, right? So the intruder gets a payoff of 0 for choosing peace when you choose peace, and a payoff of 1 for choosing violence when you choose peace, right? So if you choose peace, then they would like to choose violence. Is the same thing true when you choose violence? Yeah, it's exactly the same, right? So payoff of 0 versus payoff of 1, so they would like to choose violence. So the intruder, regardless of what you do, they do not care. They have a dominant strategy. That strategy is violence. So what you do when you have a dominant strategy is it's really nice. You just get to cross out the dominated strategies. So you just cross out anything that's worse. It's great, right? So we say, hey, they're never going to pick peace, so we're just going to take that out of our game. Okay. So now what you're left with is something really easy to solve. Okay. So we're just going to say, hey, what do you do now, right? So you know they're going to choose violence. What do you choose? Well, you get a payoff of -1 from choosing peace when they choose violence. You get a payoff of 0 for choosing violence when they choose violence. So you're going to choose violence. Both you're going to choose violence. You're going to get into a fight. It's exciting. Let's do 7. Okay, so you and your mom are exchanging gifts, right? So you know each other well, so you're able to select a gift she would like. The money spent going into the gift would make a good gift for your mom, but as we'll see with the numbers, you don't maybe care that much about your mom. I don't know, maybe you guys have been fighting or something. Okay, so we got our cheap and our pricey gifts, right? This is the sort of decision you're going to make. You're going to choose how much you put into this gift. So if you both choose a cheap gift, you get a payoff of 1, right? You both get a payoff of 1, you're not super happy. If she chooses a cheap gift and you choose to, spend money and buy stuff for her, she gets a payoff of 3, right? She gets a good gift and you have to pay the price and you're kind of, you don't get a nice gift. And then here is the holy grail. This is where you want to be, I think. When you both buy a pricey gift, you're both kind of happy. It's nice. Yeah, so this is going to be kind of like an effort game or like a prisoner's dilemma. All of them are going to look like this. Yeah, but the through line is that both of you have a dominant strategy. So to see this, what do I want to do given that my mom buys a cheap gift, right? So I have a payoff of 1 or a payoff of 0. So I choose this. And given that my mom chooses a pricey gift, what do I want to do? I can buy a cheaper pricey gift. I get a payoff of 3 versus a payoff of 2, so I'll choose the payoff of 3. Right, so here I have a dominant strategy. The dominant strategy is to buy a cheap gift for my mom. So I'm saying you don't really care that much about your mom. This might be true, might be untrue. But we do have to look at the payoffs that are in the game, maybe not the preconceived notions about how much we should care, right? So we can do the same thing with your mom, and we'll see, right, that she gets a payoff of 3 for buying a cheap gift when you buy a pricey gift, right? So she would like to buy a cheap gift, and she gets a payoff of 1 versus a payoff of 0 when you choose a cheap gift. So again, she would like to buy a cheap gift. So you both have a dominant strategy. That dominant strategy is to essentially buy each other a cheap gift. And the exciting thing, now this is why it's called a prisoner's dilemma, or like an effort game, or it could even be, splitting steak at the restaurant, splitting costs at the restaurant and buying steak as a result. But what happens here is this is kind of the efficient equilibrium, right? So this is where if I could advise you to do something, right? And sort of trap you into doing it. So I have some way to coerce you. I would want to put you here, right? If I was like benevolent and sort of wanted the best for you. But what happens is because you both have sort of this incentive to not like help each other out that much, because you're sort of really price sensitive, you don't care about them that much. What happens is you get to this inefficient, right, equilibrium. And it feels bad. I mean, this is a lot of game theory. This is a lot of the interesting things, which are games like this where you have no reason to help the other person. You actually have a reason to hurt them, and you're locked into this sort of like this race. I will tell you about the prisoner's dilemma because it's famous, important. It's this game, right? It's literally this game. The payoffs are the exact same. But the idea is that you and your co-conspirator in this diamond heist, you're both sort of hauled into this room, right? So they suspect that you robbed the jewelry store, and they haul both of you in for questioning. The detective has you on for some less intense charges, right? So they've caught you sort of doing a stick up in like a convenience store, right? So smaller offense, less money, whatever. And they lay it out, right? So they say, hey, if you cooperate with us, we will reduce your sentence, right? But we will increase the other guy's sentence because we can get him on actual charges, right? And the same thing they tell your buddy, right? They tell him, hey, we have you on some charges, we could put you in jail. We'll sort of be lenient on the sentencing if you rat on your friend, right? And of course they'll sweat you and they'll, sort of use sleep deprivation and intimidation. But at the end of the day, the structure of the payoffs is going to be that they give you less time for ratting on your friend, but when you rat on your friend, you increase the time that your friend goes to jail. And you increase it so much, right? Like, instead of going to jail for 10 years, they'll go to jail for 50. And what turns out is that you have a dominant strategy, right? The dominant strategy is ratting on your friend. And the DA does it this way. The detectives do it this way because it works. Because giving people a dominant strategy to rat on their friend is how you get them to do it, right? You line up the incentives so that the person will do what you want them to, right? So this is the same game. This is a very famous game. It's cool, it's fun. It's maybe the truth. I suspect that most people are having the thoughts, well, why don't criminals rat on each other all the time, right? And yeah, they don't. And this is probably just because they're not playing the game that I described, right? So for it to be Nash equilibria, there needs to be no history, no present, no future, or no past and no future, right? And there is a past and a future, right? If you get out of jail and you ratted on somebody, you are going to not have a good time, right? You might die, you might just get beaten up. So they overcome this game through magic and coordination. It's a question of what game are we playing. I think that's important. So these things might not always be the real world if we don't pay enough attention, I guess. If we're kind of a bit lazier, a bit fast to set up our models. Okay, so hopefully that helped. I think I hopefully showed you 3 ways to find a Nash equilibria.